Okay, fantastic. So I'm just going to say a couple of words really quickly about the Digital Ethnography Working Group before I turn over the hosting of this event to Bahareh to introduce our panelists and get us started. So the Digital Ethnography Working Group started in 2020. I am the co-founder along with Dr. Jeff Lane, who's also here in the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University. Our mission is to program events that appeal to a community of national and international scholars who are figuring out in an ongoing way how to do close-up research in a digital era. So we work on developing methods and approaches for the study of culture in both online and offline worlds and using both online and offline tools. We also have writing groups to develop our craft in intimate online writing environments and internal membership events to workshop our writing in progress. I mentioned Jeff Lane. We also have a steering committee made up of faculty here at Rutgers, which includes Dr. Caitlin Petrie, Dr. Young Rim Kim, and Dr. Yoni Rivera. And we also have the wonderful Bahareh Badiei, who is a doctoral candidate here in our school, as our event coordinator, and today as the host of this event. We have a wonderful archive of our past events on our YouTube page. I'll put that link into the chat for you. And Jeff and I will be monitoring the chat throughout the event. Our chat is usually a very robust environment. We have people putting in links and references, and we welcome all of your comments. If you have questions, please do put them into the chat, and we'll monitor and we'll ask the questions in the order in which they're received once the panelists have had a chance to speak. So without further ado, let me turn this over to Bahareh and our wonderful panelists. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you everyone else for being here today and joining us in this panel called Decolonial Practices in Digital Ethnography. As Melissa said, I'm Bahareh Badiei, and I'm a Ph.D. candidate in Media Studies at Rutgers University. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which Rutgers University is located. And where I stand today is the ancestral territory of the Lenape people. And I want everyone and all of us to take a moment to remember them and pay respect to indigenous people throughout the Lenape diaspora, and honor those who have been and continue to be historically and systematically disenfranchised. So like all of you today, I'm so excited to hear from our panelists today. So let me just give you some context on how this event came together. So today's panel is centered around some questions that many of us in the Duke and perhaps many of us in our digital ethnographic research have been grappling with. That how can we foster epistemic justice in our research practices in the digital world? What does decoloniality even look like in the field of digital ethnography? And how have scholars, researchers, and activists in the field implemented decolonial approaches in their work? So with these questions in mind, we wanted to create this space to kind of critically reflect on our practices in this field of knowledge. And I think this is such an important conversation, especially in a time when the relationships that foster care and justice for marginalized communities in the world, including the digital world, of course, are increasingly under threat. And this is that urgency that kind of inspired us to reach out to our brilliant panelists today and invite them to join us for this conversation. So without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce our fantastic panelists. Our first guest speaker is Dr. Catherine Pipe. She is an associate professor at the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology at KU Leuven University in Belgium. And she has been studying Kinshasa's media words since 2003. Her monograph, The Making of the Pentecostal Melodrama, Media, Religion, and Gender in Kinshasa, is published in 2012, and it is an ethnography of the production of evangelizing television serials in Kinshasa. Dr. Pipe has co-edited, among others, the open access book, Cryptopolitics, Exposure, Concealment, and Digital Media, and the forthcoming book, The Post-Global City, Theorizing Technology Cultures in Urban Africa, which will be published in 2026. Together with Dr. Leah Jung, who is another guest in our panel today. She coordinates the Commission for Digital Anthropology for the International Union of Anthropological and Ethnological Sciences. Our next guest is Dr. Cindy Tekobbe. She is an assistant professor of critical feminist science and technology at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She is dually appointed in gender and women's studies and communication. Her work investigates digital lives, identities, and activism practices of traditionally underserved and erased peoples and communities. Her book, published in October 2024 from the University Press of Colorado, is titled Indigenous Voices in Digital Spaces. She serves on the Executive Committee for Association of Internet Researchers, and she is the acting co-chair of the Indigenous Caucus of the Conference on College Composition and Communication. She is a citizen of Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And finally, we have with us Dr. Leah Jung, who is a senior researcher and digital anthropologist at the Global Center on AI Governance, African Observatory on Responsible AI, South Africa. Her interest in technologies and what it means to be human in the age of AI has sharpened over the years of living and working in South Africa. Leah's work is shaped by the conviction that a more inclusive framing of critical digital literacy and expertise is crucial for mitigating the challenges of AI and honing in on its opportunities. She is the author of the book Cultivating Suspicion and Ethnography, published in 2019, and the book titled Like a Bridge Over Trouble, an ethnography on strategies of bodily navigation of male refugees in Cape Town, published in 2018. So how we are proceeding with the discussion today is that I will invite our guests to present their work for approximately 15 minutes each, and then we will move on to a few questions that I've already shared with the panelists, and then open the floor to the broader Q&A. So Dr. Pipe, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Bahareh, and your colleagues. Thank you for inviting me on this series. It's evening here in Brussels. Everybody is in different time zones, but that explains the artificial light and the black window. Actually, it's dark. I'm going to share my my screen if possible. Should be working. So share, and here, yes, share, and then I'm going to go in. Yes, I think this is what you need to see, right? And I'm sorry, I think the title is partly mine. Yeah, you see the title of my presentation. So what I'm going to try to do in this presentation now is I'm going to try to formulate two lenses for a decolonial method in the study of digital experiences, digital life worlds. And the reflections are based, or the lenses are based on ethnographic insights gained during fieldwork in Kinshasa, capital city of the Democratic Republic of Congo, among users and producers of digital media platforms, content, and so on. I've been carrying out ethnographic research in Kinshasa since 2003, as Bahareh said, and especially since 2014, I have focused on studying the digital and larger forms of other forms of technology as well, but social media became more and more used around that time. So I'm going to discuss two ways in which I think we can decolonize the digital, influenced, inspired by ethnographic observations in Kinshasa. The first one may be surprising, and the second one will be, well, the first one will be inspired by observations, and the second one will be inspired by a quinoa hermeneutics of the digital. And quinoa is the adjective of Kinshasa. So things from Kinshasa is Kinois. People from Kinshasa is Kinois. Kinois music is music from Kinshasa. So my second lens is the adaptation of a Kinois hermeneutics of the digital. I am inspired by the book Theory of from the Global South, written by John and Jean Komarov, who have anthropologists who proposed already a decade ago to invert the common taken for granted relationship in academia between the global north and the south. Commonly, the global north is seen as a provider of theory, transcendent truths, axioms, certitudes, premises, and principles, while then the global south has conventionally been seen as a source of raw fact and raw materials, but never as a source of theorizing. And so I'm going to try to invert that relationship here by getting in, using Kinois theories in a sense. I argue that ethnographic observations made in the global south may lead to also new insights in digital realities in the global north. So it's hoped that South experiences from the South can inspire research on the global north. The first lens, I call it the in the meantime lens. I'm trying to go now to my, I call it the in the meantime lens, and it's inspired by disconnectivity. Disconnections, conveniently perceived as an aberration or a problem, something that needs to be fixed quickly so that we can study online interactions, so that we can go online again. Well, observations in Kinshasa show that Kinois, inhabitants of Kinshasa, constantly need to grapple with the unexpected and undesired forms of disconnection for various reasons. For example, when politicians cut the internet or slow down data traffic. But people can also be disconnected because of lack of funds, but also because of mobile credit theft. Furthermore, sometimes, as my observations in Kinshasa show, and I've written about that in an article that was published in 2021, sometimes digital disconnection is desired. For example, girls prefer their future husband to call them with mobile credit rather than with mobile data over social media platforms. Because then he shows that he can spend money, he has money to spend. This idea, or sometimes an ideal of logging off, is obviously not unique to Kinois digital life. In the global north, we're familiar with the concept of digital detoxing, which has become a marker of a particular lifestyle. But here it's that digital detoxing is a choice. And it's something that is a solution for an excess of connectivity, actually. And so I argue we need to abandon the idea that disconnection is always a problem, always generates loss, lack, and frustration, or hampers development and progress, which the ICT4D, would argue. People need to be online in order to develop further, in order to empower themselves. If we come to understand that the desire of an offline reality exists sometimes, then we can take a next step, and then we can start studying ethnographically what happens during the moments in which there is no digital connectivity. Because after all, life goes on. And this was brought home to me when carrying out fieldwork on the politics of connectivity in Kinshasa. So decolonizing digital research can also mean questioning the idea or the desire, the taken for grantedness of constant connectivity, and paying explicitly attention to social life as it happens when the connection unexpectedly breaks down or is deliberately switched off. And for example, I saw in Kinshasa during fieldwork that very often people get online during the night because then the connection costs less. So actually there's an inversion then of, digital life. Digital life happens online, which in Kinshasa is also the time of witches, is also the time of prostitutes, is also the time of illegal behavior. So it led to certain, questions that in the household were asked. Why are you online during the night? What is happening during that online life during the night? But nevertheless, he was not the only one who was online during the night, because many of his peers were doing the same. So there's another kind of sociality that then takes shape during the night. Another example was then with young women during the day. If suddenly, they would be sent mobile data, or they could get online, then they would actually stop activities in the household. And when there was a disconnection, then they would have to stop braiding hair, cleaning, cooking, showing that actually digital connectivity in itself for them had been the interruption. So I call this the in the meantime lens, and it provides first and foremost opportunities to rethink the dialectics between online and offline. It also, the attention to social life in the digital meantime can also provide new insights in what the digital actually does to individuals and to communities. There's a useful coincidence with Michael M.J. Fisher's recent theorizing about anthropology in the meantime, which is also the title of a book he published in 2018, in which he proposes an anthropology for the 21st century, which he defines as an era lived as multipolar, multi-scaled, and multi-sided. For Fisher, the in the meantime modality suggests that stuff is happening in one locale, while other things are happening in another locale. Sometimes with people being aware of that disjuncture, sometimes without them being aware of it and learning afterwards about it, or never at all. So this awareness of difference, or the lack of that awareness, is also significant to get a better comprehension of the digital experience. If I'm going to be online, do I expect people in another continent to be online as well? Or do I see, oh, I just missed them, and I always miss them? The second lens that I want to introduce is what I call reconstructing shadow conversations. When studying digital interactions, especially social media posts, but also chat conversations, sometimes I understood it's far more important to know what is not said rather than what is actually said online. And this is not unique for digital sociality. Actually, in quinoa sociality, much, if not most, attention is paid to what is not said, to the ellipsis, to the assumed deliberately withheld. In Kinshasa, urban savviness entails knowing how to read the hidden. It's a skill called benda bilili, which is Lingala, for pulling the images. Furthermore, quinoa, inhabitants of Kinshasa, and also digital quinoa, which could be people who have socialized in Kinshasa, grown up in Kinshasa, but are in the diaspora, living abroad. Furthermore, digital quinoa purposely manipulate the distinction between what is said and shown online, between the screen and the surface, and the underneath, the offline, what is actually meant with the said. Flavie is a pseudonym, but you see her here in these images. She's one of my key interlocutors. And one day she told me, and here I'm quoting a translation into English, every day, at least one of my WhatsApp status updates is addressed to a particular person, every single day. But she never mentioned, here that's the end of the quote, but she never mentions a person's name, except for birthday congratulations or condolences when someone is mourning. Flavie curates her digital persona on her WhatsApp account in line with the requirements of hiding and showing that govern daily life in Kinshasa. And she also reads others' status updates and online posts of memes, proverbs, and excerpts of songs and clips as possible locutions about others' unfolding social lives and as addressed to particular individuals, but never mentioned to whom. The series of pictures that you see here on the slide were posted by Flavie mid-May 2020. While they may see random pictures of a Sunday afternoon near the Congo River, these pictures were charged with affect. Flavie was disappointed in her partner Samurai, also a pseudonym, who did not help her out in times of financial and emotional needs that she was experiencing at the time. He had been silent and absent. So she had accepted the invitation of a professional photographer who was romantically interested in her. The photographer had taken these pictures on a Sunday afternoon, and on Monday morning, Flavie posted about 10 of these on her WhatsApp status and Facebook pages. On the surface, these photographs may just be a kind of expression of Flavie as a young mobile woman. Yet underneath these pictures lay emotions of play with the photographer, but also provocation towards Samurai. There was no text involved. The images had to speak for themselves. And obviously, they did not speak for themselves. Rather, they were embedded in a chain of hidden conversations, especially with Samurai. Any of her Facebook and WhatsApp contacts commenting on how canon, killing, or stunning she looked was, most probably unknowingly, feeding Samurai's jealousy. Oh yes, he will watch my status. He always does, Flavie said. And if he for one reason or not cannot, I'm sure his friends will show the pictures and the comments to him, she said when I was asked whether her plan was going to work. Because she did not want him to comment or respond at all. She wanted him to take action. She wanted him to open up the conversation between them again so that they could come to a solution in their relationship. But his name was never mentioned, and her intentions were never mentioned either, because there were only pictures shown. For Flavie and other Quinoa, digital expressions such as WhatsApp status updates and such publications of photographs are readily understood as carrying a metonymic relationship with the poster's personal life world. It is taken for granted that most of these posts are not published randomly, but they have intended receivers. And we need to understand these offline realities in order to better understand or better grasp the meaningfulness of digital content. This method could be called reconstructing shadow conversations. It means reconstructing the chain of conversations and events or non-events, such as Samurai not giving money or not giving enough attention to Flavie, surrounding before and after or during the posts, but happening offline or via other media. There's also another dimension about the shadow, which according to Congolese ethnography relates to personhood, the invisible dimension of personhood, but I'm not going to go deeper into that. If you want to know more about that, I refer to the chapter of which you see the bibliographic reference. But the method of reconstructing shadow conversations furthers Africanist linguistic anthropology. In 1996, Judith Irvine described how multiple participants were co-producing insult poetry, Xaxar, during wedding rituals in Dakar. Irvine observed that beyond the griot, who was articulating the insult poetry, actually many female family members contributed content to the insults. In the day preceding the wedding, the bride spends time with mothers, grandmothers, sisters, and female cousins while preparing the wedding party, the food, the salon, and the clothes, and so on. Irvine calls these interactions, which are not literally recounted then in the insult poetry, but which fed the poetry, she calls these interactions shadow conversations. Without these, which happened the days before the wedding, the bride would not know what to say, nor would her words make sense during the insult poetry. And such observations about the social contour of communication practices can inspire us to get deeper insights in digital conversations, not only in digital Kinshasa, but also beyond the global south, I hope. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pipe. I think we can proceed with Dr. Tekobbe's work.
Thank you. I'm going to share my slides. Okay. Halito, hello. Sahu Chifo Cindy Tekobbe Siachata Okla Amentili. Hamak Natak Ayala Kaya Koke. Halito, hello. I'm talking you to my name is Cindy Tekobbe and I'm from Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I'm talking to you today about my work in developing digital ethnographic methods. So let me see if I can go. So in 2024, Utah State University Press, an imprint of the University Press of Colorado, published my monograph, Indigenous Voices in Digital Spaces, in which I weave together traditional Choctaw teaching stories with 4 case studies of Native Americans using digital platforms for identity work, survivance, and activism. I share the cover with you so you can note the artwork on it. I'm going to come back to this. Writing this book was a long journey across several years, a pandemic, the death of my mother, and the transition to a new job in a new city. And along the way, I learned a lot about myself, my responsibilities to my Native communities and family, and about being a researcher, investigating, thinking about, writing about, and talking about digital decolonial methods in general and ethnographic methods specifically. So this book was an attempt to wrangle some of these ideas, but I've continued to refine them. And there's an article on digital decolonial methods I wrote coming out in Social Media and Society later this year that some of this talk is taken from. And I want to say that, start here, that's saying I'm an activist scholar. And by that, I mean that my aim with my work is to confront colonial structures in our academic institutions and research methods and scholarly culture. My scholarship is embodied in that I, as a Native woman of mixed ancestry, demonstrate survivance as I write, speak, teach, live, and breathe. However, I think anyone can do decolonial work, and I've been working on and continue working on digital decolonial framework that I'm sharing with you today. The framework has 5 points. The first is that digital decolonial ethnographic research is grounded in story work, a methodology that has been described by Indigenous scholars beginning with Archibald in 2008 and built on by many others. Story work is an Indigenous method I encourage you to explore for sharing knowledge, making new knowledge, and synthesizing culture and meaning. As Wilson reminds us, research is storytelling in collaborative ceremony, and as King reminds us, stories are all that we are. So this means that knowledge-making practices are ceremonial and spiritual in nature, and knowledge is sacred and made between humans and the more than human world. It is not the product of one person relaying what is known to another. Rather, the making is collaborative and includes the context within, the land upon, the metaphysics between, and the time among the knowledge makers in reciprocal relation to each other. The next 2 points in my framework are paired. Digital decolonial ethnographic research is relational and reciprocal. The researcher brings her holistic self, making herself open and vulnerable to creating reciprocal relationships with her research partners and participants by including, as Kahakalua says, all of my strengths, physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. I also bring my personal skills and experiences, my hopes, my dreams, my visions, and my ancestral endowments, including the wisdom that my ancestors share with me. I sleep as well, while I sleep, as well as the knowledge my many teachers have imparted to me. So sharing one's hopes, dreams, and gifts can be confounding to Western researchers because we have been trained to solve research questions and to find answers and to, quote, understand these solutions, the who, what, when, where, whether, why, and how. But this holistic sharing of the self with our participants is another way of saying that we are whole people who cannot be separated from our experiences that are integral to how we understand our place in this more than human world. So in my research notes, I record my own responses alongside my research partner's responses. I record notes about the relationship that I am building with my partner because the relationship is the foundation upon which reciprocity is built. And reciprocity means joining communities and supporting the agendas and outcomes of those communities. It means being vulnerable and approachable. It means removing oneself from observer position and placing oneself in the participant position. It means capturing a screenshot and recording it in my notes, how it makes me feel and how it inspires me to hope, and what my research partner said about it and felt about it, and what impulses made me take the screen capture in the first place. So I took this image of a sticker I purchased in 2024 from an online Indigenous store, Native Made, that is no longer in business. I folded this image into my research notes, writing, "We are still here, thank you," and expressing my pride at Lily Gladstone for winning the Golden Globe for her performance in Killers of the Flower Moon in that same month. My research notes are interspersed with these kinds of personal hopes and dreams and reflective of my continual relationships with my participants. A better example of this reciprocal relationship with Bree Island, the artist who designed the cover of my monograph that I showed you. Bree, the press licensed Bree's work for the cover, and then after I reached out to her and introduced myself, and I requested permission to purchase the artwork from her, and she agreed. She sent it to me along with 3 small pieces from her postcard collection, and we exchanged more emails. Later, I purchased additional art for my walls, and she sent them to me and told me she was reading my book. A few months ago, I again purchased art from her and gifted it to my dearest friends, Erica and Monica, for their home, and I acknowledged them in my book as my found family, and they in turn reached out to Bree to thank her. We are not just bound by commerce, but by relational accountability. We are each other's community now, networked together, and as such, I am accountable to represent Bree's artistry alongside of my own. These accountable relationships are grounded in reciprocity, and I want to be clear that a reciprocal relationship is not a transactional one. For example, if you ask an elder to speak to your research collective, you should compensate them for that work rather than extract it from them. Oftentimes, this is financial, but it can be gifts of tobacco or other ceremonial significant items. You should always ask what they want, but the compensation alone is transactional. It's the definition of extraction. Reciprocity is an active exchange instead, like guiding the elder around the talks and taking the elder to lunches yourself. It is listening and sharing during the visit. It is remaining in contact with their community and engaging in decolonial work that benefits their community. The end of the research project does not end the reciprocal relationships. People stay present with us, and learning from them changes us, and passing that knowledge making on changes others. We are always entangled and in community. The 4th feature is respect for the experiential and metaphysical, and this is also Bree's work. I think that feature asks of a lot of researchers because, as I noted, we are taught to think about a physical world in a series of solvable problems and identifiable unknowns. And respecting the experimental and metaphysical means seeing the world from a position of wonder, and then retaining elements of that wonder in our scholarship. It asks us to reposition ourselves from the pinnacle of creation to a companion to the human and more than human world. And in my monograph, I include traditional Choctaw stories of speaking and teaching creatures like owls and rabbits, alongside my case studies to sustain the sense of the metaphysical throughout the book. I'm also doing it with this talk with my voice as I embody Indigenous research practices that are personal, experiential, and present. This Indigenous feminist voice I use to tell research stories retains nuance and the personal, which I argue are at least as important as the answers to the who, what, when, where, why questions, because the personal emerges from and constructs the story work and identity work that underpin knowledge creation. Perhaps an example put more simply here is a phrase you've heard before, that water is life. When we embrace that water is a life form in a more than human world, we embrace the knowing that we protect and defend the water, and it sustains us because, and again, we are in reciprocal relationship with the water in the more than human world. The 5th feature is confronting the settler colonial project through reflection and self-awareness, but also in material conditions. One example is thinking about the language we use when we extract digital artifacts to study by taking screen captures of those artifacts. We use the words screen capture or screenshot, and both terms are taken from photography, where a photographer shoots a photo or captures an image with her lens. The Oxford English Dictionary lists a number of uses for the word shoot, as in a plant shoots up, a star shoots across the sky, or projectile shoots from a ship. And the OED's uses for capture are much narrower, suggesting seizing something or someone involuntarily, often as a prize. While shot and capture are not necessarily material, they carry the colonial implications of seizing or taking possession. And in fact, when we capture examples from our screens, we are extracting those examples from their context or their situatedness within their communities. And in a digital decolonial framework, I recommend that the researcher maintains her awareness of what she is claiming and what she is removing from its context, and that this claim changes the way she perceives the sample. I think broadening our perceptions and changing ourselves is a recurring thread through this work. Finally, I want to add that even though I've been working on this for several years, I'm only at the beginning. If I could add one more thing to this digital framework, it would be researcher humility. We are participant learners, not knowledge settlers. Tekobbe, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for your beautiful presentations. I took so many notes from different modes of experiencing digitality, such as shadow conversations, to kind of embracing and embodying decoloniality and kind of remembering that, just like Dr. Tekobbe said, relational accountability does not end with the end of the research, and all the way to the practice of applied digital ethnography as a mode of sitting with the discomfort. So thank you so much for your presentations. I have a few questions, so I'm gonna go and just ask one of them, and then we can open it up to the broader Q&A session with our audiences. So I just wanted to ask if you can reflect on some of the most pressing challenges that you have encountered or you keep encountering in integrating decolonial perspectives to your digital ethnographic research, especially when you're working within the academic and industrial structures that still prioritize dominant frameworks. So yes, anyone can just, you can unmute yourself and respond. Yeah.
So maybe I will start. I'm an Africanist. I carry out research in Africa, and which is a different. The various countries have specific governances regarding the digital, and yeah, I've been collaborating with colleagues from Cairo, Ain Shams University, which is an engineering university, and together with colleagues from London and from Berlin, in Ain Shams, we organized designathons to reflect about smart city development in Cairo, and to get the points of view and the desires and the expectations from residents, Cairenes, people in Cairo. The whole project was run by the colleague at Ain Shams University, and we were supposed to publish the outcome of our designathon, the report, which we were going to entitle the Cairo Charter about smart cities. And so I actually don't know if this will ever happen because of the particular political situation apparently at a university in Cairo. Research projects need to be vetted by the army. And this is maybe a difficult protocol, but apparently something has happened there. It's very difficult to get the backstory of it. So when we're talking about decolonizing research, I presented about, in a theoretical manner, thinking about, non-Western ways of engaging with the digital or being digital. But I also collaborate with colleagues at other universities in Africa, which is also part of decolonizing academia, decolonizing research. But then sometimes the political context is not favorable to research collaborations, and this has happened now in Cairo. So that is one element that we hardly think of. Very often when we're talking about decolonizing research, we talk about it in an idealistic manner, and it's as if people in the global South are waiting, and are embracing scholars who want to decolonize, who feel an urge to decolonize, want to, contribute to social justice, environmental justice, and so on. But we need to, be realistic as well and acknowledge that there's certain political regimes, that there's certain rules, codes that actually may crosscut with our ambitions to decolonize research. Connected to that in Kinshasa, so very often when we're talking about decolonizing research, we also, like Leah was talking a bit, and I think Cindy as well, about contributing to social justice. Now, what do you do in a city like Kinshasa, where actually there are not that many critical voices against the digital? Most people embrace the digital and want to be online, and so because it's a sign of modernity also. Even though, there's this, the girls want their husbands or their future husbands, to spend money and so on, but there's nevertheless like the whole idea about smart city development. It's very uncritically approached by local leaders. And if there is negative discourse, critical discourse, then it's most often against the political leaders themselves or the telephone companies that are too expensive in their mobile data. So then what do you do as a researcher? Are you going to transfer other forms of resistance from other areas in the world? No, you're not. So, but these are difficulties that that I'm aware of and I'm experiencing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pipe. I think we have a couple of questions for Dr. Tekobbe in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and ask them. So one of them is from Chris, who asks, could you speak more about Indigenous story-making practices? I'm interested in how you think about multiple and sometimes conflicting stories, narrators, especially in online spaces where we might be dealing with practices like this or misinformation, propaganda, and etc.
I think that's really hard. I wanted to say, so Thomas King talks about this, and I write about it as well, that when we tell stories, depending on the context, the location, the place, the space, the listeners, the intent of the storyteller, the stories that we tell change. They're not fixed. So when we talk about the way for example, when we talk about the way the continents are born on the back of the turtle in the water, the turtle part of the story remains constant, but it depends on how you're telling the story. If you're trying to emphasize that our interdependent relationship with the water, if you're trying to emphasize our long traditions of storytelling, and so I guess all storytellers are unreliable narrators, because we are telling the stories for specific reasons at specific times on specific land. And so I think I grapple with that a lot, because especially when I work in Indigenous identity work in online spaces, because like people will post to Facebook groups some random question or some random response about what's going on in politics or whatever, and it will be completely wrong, but it's still wrong in terms of it will be completely inconsistent with policies or what was stated at a press conference or whatever. But that person still has some authentic connection to the story they're telling. They're telling it for a reason, and so the way they're telling it is for a reason. And so I try to preserve the way people speak and write. I try to preserve the context that they're speaking and writing in. And I try to remember that stories will conflict because of the storyteller. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a lot about preserving context.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions from the audience?
Looks like there's a question from Caitlin. Caitlin, do you want to come on and ask your question?
I'm in a coffee shop, so I don't know if put it in the chat.
We could also read it too.
If you wouldn't mind, thank you.
No problem. And thanks for joining us from a coffee shop. Okay, this is also for Cindy. I was curious about your thoughts on story work and AI. So often the human role or labor in large language model creation is obfuscated in many ways. One being that people need to interact with and interpret data and create stories for AI to work. Could story work be a way to forefront human creativity needed to power AI? Also thinking of how to do that in a way that doesn't continue a history of extraction. Thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you. I am actually working right now in the idea of indigenizing AI and what that might look like. What does it look like to not think about what does it look like? So I can talk to you about not thinking about knowledge making as extraction from its community and its context. But the problem with generative AI and other AI is that they learn, as you know, on these large language models of data that already exists, that's already been commodified and it's already been normalized and constructed in ways that work well with digital systems, which isn't the way we authentically tell stories. So, and I'm losing the thread of my thought there. Sorry about that. So I'll tell you a quick story. So on the Choctaw Nation's Facebook page, someone posted a story. They actually asked AI to tell a story of a young boy on the Trail of Tears and the struggles he might have encountered. And then the generative AI, the ChatGPT, generated a story. And the story was sort of appalling. It included a magic grandpa who dies. It includes birds that bring messages. It includes all of these sort of tropes, racist tropes, and I questioned the value of the story, but the people who read that story in that group found it valuable. They found it not enlightening, because it's not enlightening, but they found it inspiring. And so like as a researcher, when I'm in conflict with what AI does, I'm in conflict with the way it homogenizes and condenses and replicates racist and the racist tropes that already exist in our data, and the way it strips out sort of individual identity. So this is all to say that I don't know the answer to that question, but that I am working in indigenizing AI right now, and I'm working with the Indigenous Center for Computational Futures out of Arizona State University. I think that's what it's called. And I'm not getting very far, but I'm working on it. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can also come in. So we've worked with a lot of, as I said, a lot of projects that used generative AI, so large language models in very different contexts and for different purposes. So yeah, it could be educational, it could be in agriculture, it could be a lot in health, sexual and reproductive health. And this is obviously, so these are funded by a big funder. So this is difficult. That comes with a lot of expectations and ideas about scaling. But what these projects they were already doing work in their communities, so they didn't start necessarily with the idea of let's develop a technology to fix a particular problem. They were embedded in a context, but the assumption nonetheless from the funder is that the technology is the problem solving element. But in any case, what came through in these projects and us engaging with these projects was those challenges that Cindy mentioned, and so which meant that they had to operate very flexibly. So a lot of them resolved to building their own data sets from scratch, which is immensely resource intensive, labor intensive. But in some cases, it just was not. And there's also a lot of projects that built in the African context. I know of a couple who rely more on small language models, right, to address certain for whatever purpose. But yeah, there was a lot of problematic challenges, especially say for in the context of sexual and reproductive health, where they were also used to bridge language barriers, but then you have very particular ways of talking about sexuality in different contexts, right? It's often a very metaphorical language and so on. It does not translate, and often it comes out as something that produces way more risk than it could be helpful. And the same in the context of gender-based violence, and these are very, very sensitive contexts. So there was a lot of learnings from these projects, and they were, had to be packaged now because it was funded by a particular funder in a way that, it does not necessarily discourage. I mean, these technologies might still be useful in very, very particular, if applied in very, very particular kinds of ways. But not necessarily in the ways that people who invest in these technologies from a perspective, from an outside perspective, imagine them to be scaled and to be solving, social problems at scale.
We have a question from Luis. If Luis, do you want to come on and ask your question? Otherwise, I'm happy to read it.
Hi there, yeah. Sorry, let me adjust my Zoom window. It's a little uneven. All right. Sorry. So my question, thank you for the panelists. Thank you for the amazing information that everybody shared. I was like really dialed in and listening to like the nuanced ways to practice decoloniality in my own personal research. My question is just for anybody in general who may be able to answer this. In an era of increased government pushback against work like this, does anybody have any like tips or advice to offer anybody so we can like protect our researcher and our scholarly and professional identities against any possible retaliatory measures?
I just wanted to say that I have received threats at my institution, and my those get reported to, and this is just real practical advice, those get reported to my university police department, and the university police are keeping track of them and look for patterns. I don't know. I have a tendency to take a I'm Googleable. My last name is really unique, so I'm Googleable. So I have a tendency to take a yeah, I'm giving a talk today. If you want to report me to the Department of Education, here's my talk transcript kind of attitude. But I think what I really rely on is reporting it to the university police, and also things like real simple things like when working with people, ask them first if they want to be recorded, ask them first if they want your image taken, ask them first if you want and give them the transcripts and ask them for their approval on what they've said to you. So I think asking a lot of questions and being accountable to your participants is really key.
That's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
We have one more, Bahar, at least one more in the chat too. I can go to as well. Would Abu Bakari wish to come on to ask your question, or would you like this to be read?
You can simply read the question. Thank you.
Okay, so this is for Professor Pipe. I am particularly interested in how people in Kinshasa leverage AI technologies, especially in negotiating their online self-representation and identities. Could you share some insights on this? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Abukari, for your question. Actually, AI technology, it depends a bit on how you define AI technologies. Is Google Translate AI technology, yes or no? I would say there's hardly any usage of AI technologies in social media at this point. Most people, as I said, most people, this is a city, where the majority of the people live in precarious circumstances. People can be online, but they don't necessarily possess all the digital skills to manipulate a mobile phone, to use social media to its full extent. So I have not seen it so far. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't. I'm sure in particular circles of the geeks, as they call themselves as well, they're playing with it. But then, they're also playing with it in such a way they need to protect themselves also from the government if they go too far, if they critique the government, because they can be found easily. So the risk that the other question was about for the researchers. Kinshasa is also a space where there's a lot of censorship, self-censorship as well, and IT experts also sometimes need to protect themselves against particular political threats or economic threats. People are experimenting with cryptocurrency, but that's easily, and especially in a city where the informal economy reigns, that easily, connects with other practices, which lead to suspicion, to theft also. One of my friends who had set up a scheme is now in hiding in a neighboring country, not necessarily because he has done something wrong, but because there was suddenly a hype against him, because people were suspecting that he was not totally honest and that there was something hidden. So the conspiracy theories circulate also around particular individuals, and they can suddenly become very powerful. So yeah, people don't always manifest their what they can do online. So sorry, AoIR.
Should we sneak one more follow-up here from Alexandra to Dr. Tekobbe? Alexandra, do you want to raise your question? Are you still on? Okay, it was a follow-up actually. Here you are.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. This was a follow-up. As you approach the relationship between AI and Indigenous storytelling, how are you engaging aspects that might need to remain in opacity? In other words, how are you approaching decision-making of what should and shouldn't be accessible to AI?
Thank you. This one is also complex because Indigenous storytelling, as you probably know, not all stories can be ceremonially told at all times. Some stories are for specific seasons. Some stories are for specific audiences. Some stories are for specific benchmark events in people's lives. And ceremony is like, I guess I should have discussed that. Ceremony is like living and breathing and honoring your own life and the lives of the more than human world. Ceremony is all this ceremony. Spirit is ceremony. So when you think about the data like that, you think about the same problems that we have in doing Indigenous storytelling research in the human world is the same problem we have with AI. Like, how do you protect the opacity of the stories in real time as how do you do it online? And so this is one of those things that I don't know the answer to. I know that I am very careful again to get consent. I think consent is really important, and I'm very careful to preserve that surrounding cultural knowledge about event and appropriateness and when things can and can't be told. Yeah, AI scrapes everything, and I don't know what to do about that. So that's actually one of my research questions.
Go ahead, Bahar.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Do we have any final questions? And I think we're almost at time. So again, thank you so much. We can, I think, wrap up today's or tonight's discussion, depending on wherever you are. And I believe you can like continue the conversations with our panelists through email if you want to send them emails. And thank you again to our guests for sharing your insights and joining us from different locations. And thank you, Duke, for hosting us and everyone else for joining us today.
Thank you all so much. We will circulate the recording after the talk. I will just confirm with the speakers that that's okay with everyone before I do that, and then you'll be hearing from us soon. Thank you again for joining, and thank you, Bahar, for hosting and organizing this really fantastic and important event.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Bye.
Laura. Thank you, Bahar.
Thank you.
Bye bye.